Yes, good morning. I'm Colonel Graham Fleeton and I'm speaking to you from Sydney, Australia. I'm actually in the Lancer Barracks in Parramatta, Sydney. These particular barracks is one of the barracks from where soldiers went to Turkey during this First World War. They were thinking that they were going to England to fight the Germans in France, as the Germans had invaded France, but they were taken to Egypt to train, and then they went to and landed at Gallipoli on the 25th of April 1915. Those Australians were all volunteers and they went over there and it was an adventure, as they thought, but that adventure turned into something rather more than an adventure for many of them who were left there. The people of Turkey are very friendly to Australians, even though that we did land in 1915 and there was a major action where both countries lost many. Australia lost over 8,000 people killed. They are buried at Gallipoli, and the Turkish nation lost many of its young men, and we are pleased to know that there now is a special memorial down at Helis for those that have an unknown grave in Turkey. But that action was an action that was the first action that the Australians as a nation took part in. The Australian nation was 1901 we were formed, and from that in 1914 we went to war in the First World War, and it was 1915 that we landed on the beaches at Anzac Cove, and we landed with the New Zealand Army. Anzac is a word, Australian New Zealand Army Corps, and they've only fought together twice under that auspices in the whole of history. It was in 1915 they fought at Gallipoli in your country, and in 1941 they fought at Greece. It's very interesting to note that even though they were enemies on the day, it was a very fierce action against each other, but there was also camaraderie in a form. From trench to trench they threw food to each other, they called out to each other and talked to each other, because in your history you'll know that the trenches were very close together, and as well as throwing bombs at each other, they threw food to each other. The Australians were throwing tins of bully beef, and the Turkish soldiers were throwing over the breads and the other food that they were getting, because luckily their kitchens weren't that far behind their lines, where the Australians were on bully beef and hardtack for most of the time they were there. There were kitchens down on the beach to bring forward food, but it was quite difficult to carry the food up through the trenches and up through the gullies and ravines to get to the people on the high points. As I said earlier, the fighting was fierce, but it was done with a chivalry that wasn't in many other conflicts. Each party looked after the wounded of the others, and there was an indication of great friendship when, in one particular incident, a Turkish soldier picked up a wounded officer and carried that officer back into the Australian lines. Many, many years later, that officer was one of the Governor-Generals of Australia. So it's a friendship that started in that format. At the end of the day, at the evacuation, the Australians left in the December of 1915 and early 1916. They left and they didn't go back to Gallipoli. It was a victory for Turkey. All the Allied forces left at that particular time. From then, Australians have been going back to Gallipoli for many years to visit the graves of their people, to pay their respects, and also to pay their respects to those brave Turkish soldiers that were fighting down at. Since then, there's been that wonderful memorial built to the Turkish soldiers that gave their lives for their country down at Helis itself. There's a great friendship between the Australians and the Turks. We fought together. The Australians called them Johnny Turk, and that was a term of endearment, and from then on we have been very close. I have mentioned the friendship between the Australians and the Turks, particularly after all those years. There is something else that we should be aware of, that the Australian soldiers and Turkish soldiers both have fought together on the same side, and that was in the Korean War. They both went over there as part of the United Nations Security Force, and they fought next to each other. And when the Australians came home, they really thought the Turkish soldier at that particular time was a great friend to have, and they were very confident they were fighting next place. In 1965, there was a great contingent of Australians who had fought in the action they went back to celebrate the 50th anniversary, and they landed in boats to be met by the Turkish soldiers who defended it all those years earlier. They embraced and they remained friends. Many of those remained friends till their dying days. There are no Australians left that served in that campaign. I'm not sure if there are any Turkish soldiers still remaining, because we're coming up to the 100th anniversary. This is the 100th anniversary of that campaign. There is going to be much happening in that 100th anniversary. As from 2 years ago, the Australians have been over there and training Turkish crews with what we call surf boats. Now, the surf boats are an integral part of Australia's surf rescue. We're leaving boats behind in Turkey and training the crews so they can have rescue on their beaches in the Black Sea and down the Aegean Sea. There will be a race on the 23rd of April 2015, and that will be participated by Turkish crews, Australian crews, New Zealand crews and British crews. So that will be a race down the Dardanelles and around to Anzac Cove. The other indication is that on the day of the anniversary, on the 25th of April, there will be a number of surf boats that will land on the beach. Each one will have a direct descendant of that campaign on board, and they will meet on the beach direct descendants of those who defended Turkey all those years ago. And we hope that the embrace that happened in 1965 for the actual combatants will happen with their children or grandchildren. As I said before, it's very close, Australia and New Zealand and Turkey. And for many years after the 100th anniversary, I will say the children, the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren of those that participated in the action will return to Turkey in friendship, so it should be. Thank you very much.